This is Alex Skolnick, and this is LA Metal Media.
LA Metal Media with Roc Boyum.
This is Roc Boyum with LA Metal Media, and today I have a very special guest artist with me. He is a virtuoso guitarist and songwriter, best known for his work with the Bay Area thrash metal band Testament. He's also known for his work with Sabotage, and he is a core member of the supergroup Metal Allegiance, and he also has a solo trio project. Let's welcome in Alex Skolnick. Alex, how are you today?
Good. How are you, Roc?
Very good. Thanks for asking. Really appreciate that. So, it's hard to believe. Here we are, January 2025, and in less than 2 weeks away, on January 23rd, at the House of Blues in Anaheim, California, you guys will be hosting the greatest collection of metal musicians and players to come together on one stage. Like I said, all hosted by Metal Allegiance, and you guys are going into your second decade kicking ass and being together. Did you ever imagine you'd be kicking ass into your second decade?
No, I mean, there was a time when it was rare that bands lasted longer than a decade.
Exactly.
And, here we are, it started as a tribute to bands, and now it's lasted longer than some bands.
So I recently read an interview with your bandmate in Testament, singer Chuck Billy, and he was commenting about a new Testament record that's coming out in 2025, which is super exciting news. And he was commenting about the newest member of the band, drummer Chris Dovis, who was bringing in some new metal music, exposing it to you guys that maybe he thought this was some stuff you hadn't heard before. And, in the interview, Chuck had commented that this music was not only influencing you guys as songwriters, but as musicians as well. Can you tell me how any of these new musicians have influenced you as a guitar player?
You mean the younger musicians?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's so many, and it's exciting, because they come up, they have a different perspective of when I was growing up. It was really difficult to get a metal sound, for example.
Right.
The amps at the time, they were made for sort of mainstream hard rock. If you were playing songs by Eddie Money and Foreigner and Foghat,
Right.
You could buy a Marshall from Guitar Center and it'll sound fine. But somebody like Eddie Van Halen, he had to basically become like a mad science professor. Anyway, all these years later, after Eddie Van Halen, James Hetfield, so many bands that have come since then, manufacturers figured out how to create equipment where you don't have to destroy it in order to get a good sound. So you can buy a good heavy sound. It's easier to get. And it was also hard to learn this music. In some ways that was good because you were forced to listen to the records and learn parts off albums. But the guitarists growing up today, they have a wealth of knowledge. Everything is on YouTube. If you want to see Richie Blackmore in 1977 with Rainbow, whatever, you enter it. And we didn't have any access to these live concerts. There's also tutorials, so it's just a very different process. I think they learn a lot faster. They're able to take the guitar to new places. It's exciting. In some ways, that presents new challenges because there's so many of them, and they learn so fast. I think it's harder to stand out. The ones that do are just mind-blowing.
I had heard once Steve Lukather made a comment in reference to all that, where he said, on one hand, you're getting all these really youngsters that are ultra proficient that never would have been, prior to the technology at such a young age, but you're losing something on the songwriting end, he thought.
Songwriting and the versatility. Steve Lukather is a great example. He's somebody, you can put him on a stage with Ringo Starr and he'll sound great. You could put him on stage with Sammy Hagar and he'll sound great. He can do a screaming hard rock sound, but he can also play for Lionel Richie and Michael Jackson.
Yeah, and that's a talent.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just a real craftsman. I think there's just very, very few like him.
Yeah. So, okay, well, speaking of new music, I understand, or at least I heard, maybe it's only a rumor, Metal Allegiance has new music coming out this year. Is that the case?
It's a possibility. I'll just say we have not started writing one thing.
Okay.
So I always have to be careful answering that question. Whatever project I'm talking about, whether it's Testament or anybody else, because it's an exciting story. You always want to hear about new music, but as of right now, there is no new music. We've talked about writing some eventually. I don't know if it will happen this year. I would love it if it happens this year, but with our schedules, it's always very up in the air. And even if we were able to start writing right now, I don't see how we would be able to put out music this year. It usually takes place. It usually gets released at least a year from the time you start writing. I'll just say that the intention is there.
Okay, good, fair enough. As you mentioned, your schedules are crazy. You're not sure how you guys would ever get together. I mean, do you guys ever? Is the songwriting process as such that you guys physically get together, or do you do something more like your the deal you did with Charlie Benante, during the pandemic, where you just everybody's in their own studio doing their thing?
Well, I think one of the reasons the Metal Allegiance albums have worked so well is that we did manage to find time to be in the same room.
Awesome.
Both of those records were done. They were both started with several days of the core four of us, me, Portnoy, Elvis, and Maggie, hashing it out in a studio at Mike Portnoy's house, interestingly. And I just think there's no substitute for that, and because that has worked so well before, I think that we would like to try to make that happen again. Of course, whether we do is anybody's guess. After we had those sessions, we continued, and we all sort of plugged away on our own and finished. Because we didn't finish the ideas, but we had a good batch of musical ideas, and maybe who knows? Maybe we'll start on our own this time and then get together. But I think eventually, we'll have to get together and hash things out in the same room.
Well, yeah, I've always thought that was the best way, because there's nothing like the chemistry of people being together jamming.
I agree.
Speaking of influences, let's go back in time for a moment, all the way to the very beginning when you were starting out. Was there a guitarist, a band, a sound, something that you heard that you said, that's what I have to do?
Well, I mentioned Eddie Van Halen earlier.
Yep.
And I think he solidified my direction, as he did for many people. Before I heard him, I would have been okay, being, a Paul Stanley, even. Play guitar, maybe sing, just make music. And then I slowly, I started getting interested in lead guitar a little bit with Hendrix and Jeff Beck, but I loved it, but I still thought, I hadn't gone deep in on them too. I just sort of heard them on the radio, and older musicians would say, you gotta listen to Hendrix and Jeff Beck. Jimmy Page as well. But as far as just like being, a really serious guitar player, when I heard that first Van Halen record, it was like a religious experience. And suddenly I just had this vision. Okay, I'm going to work 10 times as hard. I need to be the best guitarist I can be. And it was, eventually it was more than just him. He was the gateway to Alan Holdsworth.
Yep.
Who he would mention as an influence. And then I found out that Alan Holdsworth had replaced John McLaughlin in the band Lifetime with Tony Williams.
Yep.
And then I found out, John McLaughlin also does this acoustic project with Al Di Meola. Who's this Al Di Meola guy? and then Al Di Meola has electric albums too. And then, it's just like one thing led to another. And there's these few moments of being hit over the head by music. And they're pretty rare. But then that whole, it's obviously started with Eruption, but that whole Van Halen record, the debut album, is really, what did it for me. And then I knew I had to be a lead guitarist, and I wanted to be the best I could be.
Absolutely. And, I think it's amazing that, he had that effect. Eddie Van Halen had that effect on, hundreds, if not thousands of guitar players all over the world. And it's...
Absolutely. I'm certainly not unique in that sense. I've read very similar descriptions from fellow guitarists. And it's just amazing the effect that this one musician had.
And still having today on young musicians.
Absolutely. Nobody has come close in terms of impact. There's been some exciting players for sure, and I'm grateful to have my fans that say, "Bro, we consider you, very important," and that's very nice to hear. But the impact of Eddie it's just like if you were around then. And I was a little bit late to it. I wasn't even 10 years old when the first Van Halen record came out.
Okay.
But I discovered him about, 5 or 6 years later. And I was in junior high school, and I was already playing. And then, somebody's older brother, I think, played it for me, and it was just life-changing. And yes, you're right. Today, he's still having that impact on up-and-coming players. And as I mentioned earlier, he had a big effect on music equipment. The reason you have amps now that have super overdrive channels. He deserves some credit for that. You can play a guitar that is easier to navigate, like a Fender, but with the heft of a Gibson. He's responsible for that by carving up his Strat style guitar and jamming a humbucker pickup into it. Somehow, all these luthiers and manufacturers, it never occurred to them. And he said, he made it happen. And he was also just, one of the greatest players, hands down, that ever lived.
Absolutely. It's, to be back at that time, and as I was, and just heard this for the very first time. Like you said, there were all those brilliant guitar players, but nobody did that. And it was just kind of something like, is that really happening?
Yeah. And also, it just, it's amazing because, you hear the stories of the Van Halen years and, just how it was wild and out of control and, just this, excess rock and roll overindulgence, but yet somehow this perfect album got made. Imperfect because there are mistakes on it, but that's part of what makes it human.
Yep.
I mean, imperfect compared to, say, an album by Fleetwood Mac, who Eddie actually cited as an example, like why their records are different. Yeah, they didn't overdo anything. The records were recorded largely like their live concerts, and that was part of the magic. They captured that lightning in a bottle. But also, it came out at the right time. Hard rock was sort of taking a back seat. Punk rock was on the rise, so was disco. And suddenly hard rock was put back in the spotlight thanks to them. And also, the way the record begins with Running with the Devil and that car horn, at that top period of time, it was like this just announcement. You are hereby put on notice. Just stop everything you're doing. The old era is gone. The new era is beginning, and the rest of the album lived up to the promise of those first few moments of that alarm.
Lastly here, what advice would you give to any young up-and-coming person wanting to get into the music business?
There's so much advice, and then there's no advice I can give. Because every person's situation is different.
Right.
It's who you are as a person. It's the place and time. Things are constantly in flux. When I started playing, nobody could have imagined YouTube. Nobody could have imagined streaming or social media.
Nope.
So, you have to adjust. You have to find your own path. But, one of the most important things, I think, is not get overwhelmed by hype.
Okay.
Some artists, some players in the guitar community might get a lot of hype, and that's fine. But maybe that doesn't mean it's the player you have to focus on. You have to find the music that moves you. In my case, getting hooked on Van Halen, well, he happened to be getting a lot of hype. He was the most hyped player, and it was deserved.
Yeah,
it was
absolutely.
warranted. If anything, you could not sing his praises enough. But that was rare because in the years since then, there were many players. I think there was almost a search, like who's going to be the next Eddie? And there was no next Eddie. Some giants, Yngwie had a huge impact when he came out.
Yeah.
And still does. On guitar was Satch, my friend, Vi. But nobody Eddie is the only one who felt like he changed things on the level of a Hendrix. And you could sort of put him in that category. So just because somebody's getting a lot of hype doesn't mean he's right for you. So, the guitarist that moves you the most might be somebody at the local bar band.
Yeah.
Or it might be some obscure player on some out-of-print album. It doesn't matter. You have to find the music that speaks to you. And don't worry about what the magazines say. Don't worry about what your friends say. Just avoid the hype. Find what moves your spirit and let that guide you.
Well, that's super sound advice. January 23rd, House of Blues, Metal Allegiance, greatest collection and assembly of metal musicians on the planet. At one point, if you don't go to any other show this year, go to this show. Thanks for being with us, Alex.
Yeah, my pleasure, Rock. Thank you.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.